Though there are clearly many problems with humanity and bad things that people do, I still think that humanity is great and that we should do everything in our power to ensure that the future is bright, exciting, and one that maximizes the happiness of the people at the time of our launch. Because at the time, neither NASA nor any other party could come up with a single idea to increase the likelihood of success. So we did the best we could and launched. Although I'm not religious, I nevertheless got on my knees and prayed for that mission initially. When the launch was successful and they safely returned to Earth, it was a great relief. I believe that as we became more accustomed to our surroundings and worked out the system, after all, you have to make sure everything functions. The subsequent asteroid missions became much more enjoyable. Additionally, I felt that the Inspiration mission served as a great source of inspiration for a mission. I'd encourage people to watch the Inspiration documentary on Netflix. It's actually really good, and it really isn't. I was actually inspired by that, so that one, I felt I was kind of able to enjoy the actual mission and not just be super stressed all the time. So for people that somehow don't know, it's the all-civilian, first time all-civilian out to space, out to orbit. It was, I think, the highest orbit that in, 30 or 40 years or something. The only one that was higher was the one shuttle, a Hubble servicing mission. And then before that, it would have been Apollo in 72. It was pretty wild. So it's cool, it's good. I think as a species, we want to be continuing to do better and reach higher ground. I think it would be tragic, extremely tragic, if Apollo was the high watermark for humanity. And that's as far as we ever got. And it's concerning that here we are 49 years after the last mission to the moon. And so almost half a century, and we've not been back. Also, I think we got to get back to the moon and build a base there. Science base, we already have a science base in Antarctica and many other parts of the world. So I believe that building a proper science base on the moon would allow us to learn a great deal about the nature of the universe. The next big thing we'll need to build is a serious black moon base, after which we should send people to Mars to establish a spacefaring civilization. When I look at the rocket, I see all the things that could go wrong and the things that could be better. Similarly, when other people say, oh, this is a spacecraft or a rocket and this looks really cool, I'm like, I've like a readout of these are the risks. These are the problems. I think that some people will know, but a lot of people don't know that I'm actually the chief engineer of SpaceX, and I've signed off on pretty much all the design decisions. So I'm really just thinking about all the things that's what I see. And actually, by far, the biggest thing of solving my time is engine production. Not the design of the engine. I've often said prototypes are easy, production is hard. So we have the most advanced rocket engine that's ever been designed, because I say currently the best rocket engine ever is probably the OR-170, the dual Russian engine, basically. And still, I think an engine should only count if it's gotten something to orbit. And so our engine has not gotten anything to orbit yet, but it's the first engine that's actually better than the Russian engines, which were amazing design. There's a lot of components and a lot of unique materials, so we had to invent several alloys that don't exist in order to make this engine work. It's a materials problem, and in a stage combustion, that full floor stage combustion, there are many feedback loops in the system. Basically, you've got prop B and hot gas flowing simultaneously to so many different places on the engine, and they all have a recursive effect on each other. So you change one thing here, it has a recursive effect here, it changes something over there, and it's quite hard to control. It has the highest theoretical efficiency, which is why no one has made it before and why we're doing a stage commotion full flow. Therefore, everything needs to be the best, including the engine, in order to create a fully reasonable rocket, which is essentially the holy grail of orbital rocketry. The ideal airframe, the most effective heat shield, incredibly light avionics with extremely intelligent control systems. You must reduce mass in any way that is practical. For instance, rather than attaching landing legs to the booster and ship, we will use to power to save the landing leg. Our highly skilled team is working around the clock to make this happen. As I mentioned earlier, the key to bringing about a revolution in spaceflight and enabling humanity to live as a spacefaring civilization is to develop an orbital rocket that is fully and quickly reusable. There has never been an orbital rocket that is fully reusable, and this has always been the holy grail of rocketry. Many intelligent people have attempted to accomplish this in the past, but their efforts have failed due to the difficulty of the problem. Making a useful humanoid robot that can interact with the world and assist in many different ways is a very useful thing that we can do for the world. In factories and really just, I think if you say extrapolate, many years in the future, I think work will become optional. There's a lot of jobs that if people weren't working would still need to be done. But quitting is not in my nature. The problem that the Tesla bot has to solve is interacting with humans and potentially having a place like in the home, so interacting, not just not replacing labor, but also like, being a friend or an assistant. Paid to do it, they wouldn't do it. Like, it's not fun necessarily if you're washing dishes all day. It's like, hey, even if you really like washing dishes, do you really want to do it 8 hours a day every day? Probably not. And then there's like dangerous work. And basically, if it's dangerous, boring has like potential for repetitive stress injury, that kind of thing. Then that's really where humanoid robots would add the most value initially. So that's what we're aiming for, is for the humanoid robots to do jobs that people don't voluntarily want to do. I haven't really thought that far into the future with the Tesla bot or its code named Optimus. I call it Optimus Subprime because it's not like a giant transformer robot, but it's meant to be a general purpose help robot. And basically the things that were basically Tesla, I think dangerous potentially. So the interventions per million miles has been dropping dramatically, and that trend looks like it happens next year, is that the probability of an accident on FSD is less than that of the average human, and then significantly less than that of the average human. So it certainly appears like we will get there next year. Then there's going to be a case of, okay, well, we not have to prove this to regulators and prove it too. And we want a standard that is not just equivalent to a human, but much better than the average human. I think it's got to be at least 2 or 3 times higher than a human, 2 or 3 times lower probability of injury than a human before we would actually say like, okay, it's okay to go. It's not going to be equivalent. It's going to be much better. So if you look, FS 10.6 was just released and Tesla FSD 11 10.7 is in the works. It's possible that 11 will arrive at some point in the future. 11 has numerous significant changes, neural network architecture, and a few key advancements in the creation of vector space. EP11 would be a single stack for all stacks to rule them all. But there are just a few really fundamental changes to the neural net architecture that will allow for much more capability at first. They will have problems, for example. We have this working on sort of alpha software, and it's good, but it's basically taking a bunch of code and leading a massive amount of code and replacing it with the neural net. Andre often brings up the point that neural nets are kind of eating software over time, with less and less conventional software and more neural net, which is still software, but more and more neural net. That is, less and less traditional software, basically. But to think about what your brain is actually doing consciously. It's like you'll see a car because you don't have cameras, you don't have eyes in the back of your head or the side, so you say like your head is like you basically have like 2 cameras on a slow gimbal and eyesight. Isn't that great? Okay, human eyes are, and people are constantly distracted and thinking about things and texting and doing all sorts of things they shouldn't do in a car, changing the radio station. When's the last time you looked right and left and rearward or even diagonally forward? Refresh your vector space so you're glancing around, and what your mind is doing is trying to distill the relevant vectors, basically objects with a position and motion, and then editing that down to the least amount that's necessary for you to drive.